This is the third and final short video for our introduction to the book of Acts. So we're just going to look at one episode that occurs in Acts 10 and then is repeated, or Peter tells the story of this incident in Acts 11. Um, it's probably one of two events in the book of Acts that utterly change the course of kind of religious history and certainly changed the course of the Christian movement. And some would argue is sort of the birth of Christianity as we know it. Um, and it's really just an interaction between two people, between Peter, the follower of Jesus, the disciple of Jesus, and a man named Cornelius. So the scene takes place, well, each man has a dream or a vision to begin the scene. I'm going to read a little bit from each of their visions, and then we'll discuss um, specifically what happens, and then talk a little bit about the implications, and then we'll call it good, and then we'll take up from there with some other stuff in Acts after the break. So, starting in Acts 10. At Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave to those in need and prayed to God regularly. One day at about 3 in the afternoon he had a vision. He distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, "Cornelius." Cornelius stared at him in fear. "What is it, Lord?" And the angel answered, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa and bring back a man named Simon who is called Peter." And that's Cornelius' dream. So what is really important to note here, and you probably picked up on that in the reading, is that Cornelius is a Roman soldier. He is a Gentile. He is not Jewish. Um, He's a God-fearing Gentile who gives gifts to the poor and prayers to God, but he is not part of the nation of Israel. He's not circumcised. He's not a practicing Jew in any kind of formal way. So, by Jewish tradition, by the teaching of Torah, he would be outside of the people of God. He's a Gentile. He's an outsider. He's unclean. Okay, so that's the first person, and that's the first dream. Second is Peter, the follower of Jesus, the disciple. And this is what it says about Peter. About noon the following day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while the meal was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its four corners. It contained all kinds of four-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Then a voice came to him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." The voice spoke to him a second time, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." This happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back to heaven. Okay, so I hope you notice there at the end of the story that triple repetition that we talked about from Luke 15. Very important in Judaism to communicate something 3 times is to give particular importance to it, to really it's a binding or incredibly powerful message. So this angel of God, this voice from heaven, communicates 3 times to Peter. And basically what is happening is in this sheet are unclean animals. It's a whole array of animals that Jews are not allowed to eat. And not just by their tradition, by the actual teachings of Scripture. Scripture tells them, do not eat these specific animals. And yet, here is this sheet that has come from heaven, filled with these animals, and a voice telling Peter, go and eat, kill and eat. Peter refuses. He's a good, faithful Jew. I mean, as we've been stressing, at this point, all of these folks they have not left Judaism. They are still within Judaism, just viewing Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. And he refuses. I won't do it. I won't violate the teaching of Torah. But this voice says, if God has made it clean, it is clean. Do not call unclean anything that God has made clean, is specifically what the voice says. Peter wakes up. He's not quite sure what to make of this vision. He's not sure if it's about food, really what is going on here. But as he comes out of this trance, or he wakes up, or however you want to look at it, um, the servants from Cornelius have arrived at the house. And he goes downstairs, and interacts with them, and realizes that this is what the vision was about. That it actually, in this case, was not primarily about food, but about clean and unclean as it relates to Gentiles. Um, as we've discussed in the Gospels, not only are there foods that make a Jew unclean, but interacting with Gentiles in very specific ways also can make them unclean. One of the primary things being to never enter the home of a Gentile. So Jews would, if they had to do dealings or business or had to talk with a Gentile, would never go into the home, would wait outside, and the Gentile would have to come out. We see this in the trial of Jesus. Pilate has to go outside to meet with the Jewish leaders. They will not bring Jesus into his house. And so Peter realizes that what this dream is telling him is that in spite of all his kind of understanding of Scripture and his cultural biases and whatnot, he is to go to Cornelius's home, to enter into his home and to share a meal with a Gentile. And certainly, for Peter, as a faithful Jew, this is the first time he would ever have done that. And he probably doesn't have any relationships with other Jews that would ever do this or consider doing this. And yet he understands that God has specifically told him through this vision to do that. Peter goes to Cornelius's house, shares the good news of Jesus with him. Cornelius immediately becomes a believer, as does his entire household, which is an interesting aside. One of the things that we see here in Acts as well as the Gospels is that conversion often is more of a communal thing in the New Testament than in our individualistic society. In America today, when we think of becoming a Christian, Peter would have to share the gospel with each person in the family, and they would individually have to decide. Whereas in this story, it seems as if as Cornelius becomes a follower of Jesus, so do all of his family. So does the entire household, perhaps even servants as well. But what is tremendously important here is that a Gentile has entered into faith in Jesus without going through the process of first becoming a Jew. At the day of Pentecost, there are certainly former Gentiles who have become Jews who hear Peter's preaching and become followers of Jesus, and that's probably true in all of the first chapters of Acts. But here is somebody who has skipped that in-between process of becoming Jewish, and that has gone straight from a Gentile pagan, essentially, to a follower of Jesus because of the ministry of Peter, because Peter has entered his home and set aside all Jewish custom and teaching in terms of what was appropriate interaction with Gentiles. This is such a big deal that chapter 10 tells that story. Chapter 11 is taken up with Peter retelling that story. So chapter 10 is kind of like the live event, and it causes such an uproar with the Christians in Jerusalem that Peter goes and reports what has happened. I know this sounds strange. I know this sounds bizarre, but here's this thing, and I promise you, God told me to do it. Chapter 11 is the recounting of the exact same story a second time. This is really, really significant. Without this event, we probably don't have what today looks like Christianity. Without this event and the ministry of Paul, who we will look at starting on Monday, without those two things, the followers of Jesus probably remain just a small little group within Judaism. And there's no telling how 2,000 years later, how that would have changed or morphed. This is kind of opening a door. And what we're going to see is the Apostle Paul is going to run through that door and then just kind of blow the door down. He's going to, in his life and ministry, just spread the news of Jesus far and wide across the Roman Empire. Peter does not so much do that. Um, Peter's ministry continues to be primarily with Jewish folks and talking to Jewish believers about Jesus. But in this one instance, he is the one who opens the door. He's the one who first makes possible a ministry to Gentiles separate from their converting to Judaism. And that is going to have huge ramifications. Probably if those of us that are Christians in the class, if we were to trace back, our family heritage of faith, there would be very few of us who came from Jewish backgrounds. I mean, Christianity quickly is going to become primarily a Gentile, non-Jewish religion. And that has not happened yet. At this point, still the mass majority of followers of Jesus are Jewish by heritage and faith. But that is quickly going to change. By the end of the book of Acts, that will have changed significantly, and then within 2-3 decades after that, Christianity will be spreading rapidly throughout the Roman world and primarily through Gentiles. And this all begins with this event with Peter and Cornelius. Peter going to Cornelius' house and entering in and sharing a meal with him, a Jew eating with a Gentile. So have a great Thanksgiving, and we will see you on Monday.